No matter where you stand on this movie, here's what dropping your review is like. Run for cover! What is up, guys, and welcome to my review of Superman, James Gunn's 2025 reboot of not only this character, but this entire DC cinematic universe. Quickly before I get into my thoughts on this film, I just want to set the stage properly on who I am and where I stand as a Superman fan, because I do think that's important to understand my perspective on this film. As a kid, I never really cared for the character. I never really felt myself drawn to watch any of the Christopher Reeve films. Actually, just watched them for the first time about a week ago, so you guys will get all my thoughts on those for the first time in a ranking that's going to drop in a few days. But never watched them as a kid, never even really cared to watch the animated series or any of the animated movies that came out. I was always more drawn to the darker, more broken characters like Batman, Spider-Man, Wolverine, and I pretty much maintained that attitude all the way into adulthood. I saw Superman Returns when it came out, didn't care much for it. I have yet to rewatch that one, so that's on the priority list as well. And then a little movie called Man of Steel dropped, which I walked into saying, it's another Superman film, and something about the way that Zack Snyder and Henry Cavill approached that character, it was the first time that I found myself really interested and really captivated by the character of Superman. Now, I know that movie and that take on the character has its detractors for reasons, some of which I don't understand, some of which I do, but it was the movie that made me a Superman fan. And so I, like a lot of very vocal people on the internet, was not very happy at the way that WB continued to treat Henry Cavill and this character, where we never got a proper Man of Steel 2. Batman v Superman, while having a lot of things that I like, felt extremely rushed, and everything that happened with Justice League especially, and capping it all off with throwing him in as a nice tease for fans at the end of Black Adam, and just maybe 2 weeks later, maybe even not that long after the movie came out, saying, we're done. We're starting from scratch. There will always be a frustration in me that we never really got to see a proper continuation of that character or a proper continuation of that movie. But with that being said, I was also somebody that, while a number of movies in the DCEU I really enjoyed, I felt like it was just absolutely scattershot, and as long as it went on, it was very apparent this thing absolutely needed to hit the reset button. So when they eventually announced that they were going to be scrapping the DCEU, starting from scratch, and having James Gunn be the head of all of that, and be the one who was going to write and direct the first film, which is a Superman reboot, I was totally on board for it. I really enjoy what James Gunn does. I've liked every single one of his movies, especially his comic book films, and I felt like even though it was clear it was going to be a very different take than what I really liked with the Zack Snyder, Henry Cavill version, I was ready to see a more quote-unquote classic representation of Superman because I kind of missed out on enjoying that take on him when I was a child. And with all that said, this movie does have a lot of baggage and a lot of extra weight on its shoulders that in the normal circumstances, a movie should not have. It doesn't just have the expectation of being a good Superman film. It also has to be a version of Superman that hopefully will bring the fandom together, those that like the darker, more Zack Snyder take and those that like the more classical side of Superman. It also has to kick off a brand new universe and sell us on that universe, wanting us to buy more tickets to whatever amount of movies, TV shows, and video games are to come out of this new universe. So the question is, did James Gunn deliver? Do we have a new Superman that I'm excited for? Do we have a new DC universe that I'm sold on and excited for? Am I still bitter? Or am I ready for what the future brings? And starting off with the positives, I will tell you that for the most part, I am very happy with what we got here. I think that we got a really great Superman film. I think we got a great kickoff to the new versions of this character as well as all of the attached side characters. I think that there's a really nice balance here of having that classical, more hopeful, a little bit more family-friendly and whimsical side of Superman, while definitely still having some of those modern comic book filmmaking sensibilities. And I do think they do a good job within the same film at setting us up for a lived-in, fully operational DC universe that I'm very much sold on and excited to see what else comes out of it. First and foremost, I think James Gunn absolutely nailed the casting here. David Cornsweet is a fantastic Superman. I'm going to give him some time before I even approach saying anything like he's my Superman, because as of right now, Henry Cavill is my Superman, but I really enjoy what he brings. Again, I think he's a nice balance of being a little bit more of a modern and somewhat edgy Superman, while very much leaning on some of the Christopher Reeve sensibilities that a lot of Superman fans have been saying and shouting for years now that they want to return to. I think he's a really great balance with that. He totally has that Superman look about him. He's a bona fide movie star. I think that very clearly after this, you're going to be seeing a lot more of this guy because he's pretty damn awesome. I also think Rachel Brosnahan, perfect casting as Lois Lane. Lois Lane is one of those, counterparts to the superhero, call them damsel in distresses, whatever, that I've never really totally been on board for. There's a lot of different takes to the character. Sometimes she leans a little bit too much on being a little bit more abrasive as a reporter. I really like the balance that we got here with Brosnahan's, where she's somebody that it very much has great chemistry with David Cornsweet. They have this electric charm about them. You don't need, in my opinion, to see the origins of how they fell in love with each other. We're just told, hey, we're here, we're a couple, and they sell it on screen. But also, she's somebody that is a tough character. She's somebody who's not just, the damsel in distress like we saw like Mary Jane get reduced to for 3 movies in a row, where she's just falling off of rooftops for 3 movies. I like the fact that she's a little bit more take charge here, and she has a place in the story for her to add to the conflict here and try to fight the conflict in her own way as a journalist, and the fact that she's not afraid to ask the tough questions to Clark.
You illegally entered a country.
This is how you're gonna be?
I'm not the one being interviewed, Superman.
So I really enjoyed what she brought here. And then, of course, you have Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. And while I do have some concerns for how the character was written and portrayed that I'll get into a little bit later, I think the performance was awesome. I love Nicholas Hoult. I've been a fan of him ever since the X-Men films. I love what he's done in movies like The Menu and Juror Number 2. I think he's fantastic as an actor, and I really enjoyed the intensity and the bitterness that he brings to this Lex Luthor. So while I hope to see some alterations and changes to how the character is characterized, I think he did great as an actor. And then even all of the smaller side characters like Perry White and especially Jimmy Olsen, they bring a really fun dynamic here too. So this new universe, this new cast of Superman characters, I am totally bought in on. I think that they were cast perfectly across the board. One of the things that will immediately stand out to you within the first 20 minutes or so of this movie is that it is full-blown, balls to the wall, unapologetic comic book. Like, I've seen some people say this might be the most comic book film we've ever gotten, and that's not really hyperbole. Like, we've seen some pretty zany shit out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and even the DCEU and even some of the Fox stuff, but this thing literally feels like we just opened up the page of a comic book panel and just jumped right in. Or even more so, it kind of gave me the vibe of like I just turned on one of the classic animated series, be it the Superman or the Batman animated series, and just like when you were a kid, when you turn that on, you're just right in the action. You're just right in the middle of the story. You just hit the ground running and you're on board with whatever these characters are doing and who they're fighting against. And that's the attitude that this movie takes. And I found that to be really refreshing, because while we've certainly had a lot of fantastic movies come out of the more modern comic book sensibility of trying to be more grounded and trying to be tethered somewhat to the reality of our world in response to things like the Nolan trilogy, I do think that there is an appeal to having a movie that is just unapologetically from a different world entirely. Like, the rules of Earth do not apply there. There's giant robot suits and kaijus and, the world splitting apart through cosmic reality and all kinds of balls to the wall crazy stuff happening on a daily basis. And that's just the world that they live in. And I think that that's an interesting place to start, because if we're going to have characters like Green Lantern and Superman and Martian Manhunter and Wonder Woman, Batman, I'm a little curious how he's going to fit into here. I'll elaborate more on that later, but so many larger than life, like godlike characters, you have to craft your universe in a very specific way that allows for the most fantastical elements of those characters and those stories. And James Gunn just pedal to the metal, just brings you into that type of world. And so I really enjoyed the fact that this movie just gave no fucks about reality. And it's like, we're in a comic book, baby, let's go. And speaking of pedal to the metal, the pacing of this movie is also balls to the wall. Like, it pretty much starts right off with action sequences and fights, and it really doesn't let up. Of course, you have moments where there's character development and there's dialogue and there's quieter scenes between characters, but for the most part, this thing is just mile a minute with what is going on, almost to the point where I wish the movie was about 10 or 15 minutes longer to let things breathe a little bit more, which is nothing but a compliment to the movie. But I like the fact that it's just fast-paced, action-packed. It just goes for it. It wants you to get right into the action, right into the world, right into this year 3 Superman. And so it makes for a very fun, very exciting, very enjoyable comic book movie. One thing about the approach that James Gunn takes here that I'm actually kind of surprised worked for me as much as it did is that he very deliberately takes a more family-friendly attitude to this movie, and I assume to a lot of what we're going to see in this universe, maybe save for whatever Batman movies we're going to get. And what I like about that is that I think that there is a real sensible balance here in trying to appeal to everybody in a way without making the movie feel kiddie. Finding ways to have a fun, lighthearted attitude about what you're doing without completely diluting the stakes or the reality of what is going on. Like, you'll have definitely some more lighthearted dialogue. There is a good amount of humor in here. Some of it will work for some of it will not work for others. And then you also have like an aw shucks kind of attitude towards Superman and the way that he interacts with certain people that I think kids are really going to enjoy. Of course, Crypto the dog is probably the biggest example of trying to appeal to kids. They're definitely trying to have like a Baby Yoda type thing, and it worked because I took my kids to go see Megan 2, and my 8-year-old was like, yeah, I don't need the Megan popcorn bucket. I want that Crypto dog. She ended up getting both because I spoil my children, but that's neither here nor there. But you have elements like that in here that very much will appeal to having whole families go out and enjoy this film. But I think some of the themes of the movie, especially the central character arc of Clark Kent, some of the character interactions here, they lean more into the mature, a little bit more deep side of things that I think will appeal to the adults. Like, you have a sequence here between Clark and Pa Kent that was very emotional, especially for me who gets emotional with father-son stuff. And so I do think there's a really nice balance here. As somebody who tends to like the darker, more mature stuff and sometimes can feel a little bit left behind when movies try to go too family friendly, I liked the balance that we got. Another element that I was not sure whether it was going to work for me, and for the most part, I actually really liked the way that they did this, is that this is very much not another origin story. And while there's certainly pieces of me that always selfishly wants to know more backstory, wants to get some of the origins, and I just enjoy a good origin story like most of us do, I like the fact that we can have a movie like this where we just go right into year 3 Superman. We don't have to see the ship landing. We don't have to see young Clark Kent. We don't have to see Krypton explode. We don't have to see him in high school or anything like that. We just go right into it, and it gives us just enough exposition with opening text and with some of the early character interactions to get us caught up to speed enough to be able to understand where this Superman is and where his attitude is and what is different about this take on Superman. So I appreciate the fact that while it doesn't often work, James Gunn was able to find a way to skip the origin story and still give us a storyline and a character that we are fully invested in without feeling like we're missing something. Like, I've seen some people say this feels like a sequel to a movie I haven't seen, and I would fully agree with that statement, but for me it would be more in a positive leaning tone, where, as I said, this feels like we're opening up an issue of a comic book. And oftentimes when you read comics or you watch an animated show, you're not going to go back to episode 1, issue 1, all the way back in the 70s or anything like that. You're just going to jump in wherever you're opened up in this story. And hopefully, if it's written well, you get enough details about everything to be able to get caught up to speed and just enjoy the story that you're currently on. And I think that's the attitude that James Gunn took with this movie, and he did a really good job at realizing that in a way that doesn't feel like it's left me behind as a viewer. And finally, I really enjoyed the score to this film. Now, it does heavily incorporate the classic John Williams score from the Christopher Reeve films, which I genuinely think is one of the best superhero scores of all time. For as much ignorance as I have had to those movies, I've always enjoyed that score, and I've got an even newfound appreciation for it now that I've seen those films. And I do think there's an element to it that feels like that's a part of Superman's on-screen DNA. So I think it's cool that they've incorporated that score while changing it, while modernizing it, while retooling it a little bit. So John Murphy and David Fleming, the composers here, I really liked what they did. And there's plenty of moments in the film where that classic score kicks in, or their new version of it, that really just gives you that punch that you need in that scene to be like, fuck yeah, this is Superman, baby. Like, you get hopeful, you get excited, you almost want to jump up and cheer in certain moments. That's what a great comic book movie score should do, and I think this one achieves it. And now moving on to the mixed, and all of these I definitely lean mixed positive, but I do have concerns and some complicated feelings about every single one of them. First one here being the Justice Gang. So that is Hawk Girl, Green Lantern or Guy Gardner, and Mr. Terrific. And Mr. Terrific, I think, easily is the standout. I think he gets the best standout moments. He's got some really great lines, some really good laughs, a cool action sequence in the movie. The one of the three that I was least familiar with ended up being the one that I was most interested in and hope I get to see a lot more of him. Guy Gardner, I was a little bit on the fence with. He's definitely there for comedic relief, which I don't have any comic book knowledge with these characters, guys. Maybe that is exactly what Guy Gardner is. But yeah, Nathan Fillion plays a really fun comedic relief. I don't know, something about the character was always being there for a joke. I never love those types of characters as much as some others. And then you have Hawk Girl, who I love Isabella Merced. She totally gets shortchanged of the three. I don't really know what she was doing there. So I don't think the characters made the movie feel overstuffed with characters, which was my bigger concern. But what we do get here, they're fine. They're cool, especially Mr. Terrific, but not a complete knockout. Something that is definitely going to be an asterisk until we get more movies in this universe. I have a little bit of concern for the tone of the universe and how they're going to achieve certain things, like I've alluded to a couple of times now, what type of Batman we're going to get in this universe, with how fantastical and how comic booky and borderline cartoonish, and I mean that in a good way, that a lot of things are here. I'm curious how James Gunn is going to navigate having all these different characters with these different tones and stories within the same universe. Like, if you have Superman here with much more of the lighthearted things, is it going to make sense when we go to Gotham and people are being shot in the street? Like, I don't know. That's something that we're gonna have to find out as we go on. But the only thing I will say that even just one movie in, I have a little bit of concerns for as far as the tone, is that because it is such a fantastical and over-the-top comic booky world, I do think it puts a cap on how much stakes you can have. Like, just within this one movie, you have a huge robot suit fight, you have a kaiju. I'm not going to lean into talking about anything in the third act, but Metropolis gets fucked up on the regular, on the daily. And so at what point does it become too much? Does it become a little bit too normal to have these huge, larger than life things happen until you start to diminish the seriousness of everything? Like, there's literally a sequence where Clark and Lois are having like kind of a winding down for the night conversation while there's like a intergalactic being being fought just outside of the window. Like, that's just commonplace in this world. So I love the fact that it's balls to the wall comic booky, as I said, but I wonder how we're going to achieve different things within this same universe if that's the tone we're picking. I was also very mixed on how they went about the parents of Clark Kent, both Jor-El and his Kryptonian mom, as well as Ma and Pa Kent. Now, I won't get into spoilers, but there is a pretty significant change to what I understand the lore to be, but with the relationship between Jor-El and Kal-El. Maybe somebody who's more of a comic book expert will correct me on that, but it was a pretty huge change from what I've ever seen, and I think it's going to be a very divisive element, and I still don't even know how I feel about it, but it's a very core piece to Clark Kent's storyline and his main character arc in this film, and I like what it brings for his character, which is where the positive side of this comes along. I think that it creates this question inside of him about struggling with his lineage and struggling with who he wants to be, what type of Superman he wants to be. That is a very interesting character arc. I just don't know about the way that we had to get him there. And then going into Ma and Pa Kent, outside of that one sequence with Pa Kent that was very emotional, you have a super redneck Ma and Pa Kent here, which a very different take than what I have seen. So I guess it makes sense if you're born in this little farm town in the middle of Kansas. Maybe it's been odd that we've never gotten a Ma and Pa Kent like this, but it took a little while for me to get used to. It was something where at first it was very much like, oh wow, yeah, we're really leaning into the Kansas side of Ma and Pa Kent this time. So another thing that I think is going to be divisive for a lot of people.
I cleaned your boots. I'll go get them for you.
But probably the element that I'm most mixed on is the characterization of the Lex Luthor character, who is your lead villain here. Now, again, at risk of repeating myself too much, I am not somebody who's read a whole bunch of comic books, so maybe this take on Lex Luthor is extremely faithful to a number of beloved storylines. That's possible. Let me know in the comments. But for me, while this is the most maniacal, the most evil, the most hateable and despicable version of Lex Luthor, which makes for a great villain because you can't wait to see him get the shit kicked out of him. But there was a side to his character that came really close to annoying me. And that's the side of him that is just an absolute belligerent hater. So as somebody who deals with a lot of haters, you'll have to forgive me. I have a little less tolerance for those types of people than normal folk. But there is a side to this Lex Luthor, the loud side of him, that is absolutely an obsessive, petty bitch. Like, he just hates Superman with every fiber of his being, just because. Part of that we don't really get the origin to, because again, we're kind of kicking off year 3, so we don't find out what the inciting incident was, if there ever was one. But the way that we get the Nicholas Hoult Lex Luthor in this film, like, it's not that much of a comedic exaggeration to say that this guy just sits around and is just like, I'm fucking Superman, just saving people and shit, and everybody likes him, I fucking hate him. Like, Superman just existing twists this guy's tit. Like, the fact that he's out there smiling, has a good relationship, has, mostly a lot of people that really enjoy him for what he does, it just absolutely drives this guy insane for no discernible reason. But yeah, I mostly liked what we were doing here. I thought the performance was great, but there was just a side to him that it was almost like it was a little over the top, a little overcooked for my own personal taste. So I hope that as we get more of this character and get more of that rivalry with Superman, that maybe we start to get a little bit more of a cold, calculated Lex Luthor versus somebody who's just so emotional and high-strung about everything. And to be fair, I've never really liked any on-screen portrayal of Lex Luthor that I have seen. Like, I have yet to talk about it, but I don't really care too much for the Gene Hackman version. I didn't care for the Kevin Spacey version. I certainly did not like the Jesse Eisenberg version. I have yet to watch any of the TV shows, so maybe Michael Rosenbaum's version would be my Lex Luthor. But yeah, this is a character that, I don't know, I've never really sold completely on Lex Luthor. And now moving on to the negatives. And despite the fact that I said I enjoyed how fast-paced the movie is, how it gets you right into the action, and how we're not doing an origin story, I think it's fair to say that there are certain elements of the movie, certain character relationships especially, that needed a little bit more time to breathe, needed a little bit more on-screen time to develop out things, to make things a little bit more solidified, and even avoid some tell, don't show type storytelling that this movie has to rely on once in a while because it's just doing so much in one runtime. So namely, like the rivalry between Clark Kent and Lex Luthor, maybe even some of the relationships with his co-workers and the Clark Kent side of Superman feel like they get a little bit shortchanged and a little bit quickened for the sake of everything else. Still enjoyed it overall, but if we got an extended cut of this film, I would really like to see that. I think I'd like it even more. I also think that there's a number of moments in the film where the dialogue is pretty clunky. James Gunn tends to write movies and characters very well. I think this is maybe one of his weaker efforts because you do have a number of moments where, like I said, you have a lot of tell, don't show, whether it's Lex Luthor's motivations, whether it's certain explanations of how this world works, where I wish we could have seen it rather than just being told. Like, even just a small example, the hypno glasses, which is how Clark Kent is able to disguise his true identity. I wish we could have got just even a quick scene of visualizing that versus somebody telling us that's how it works. And there's also a few moments where it leans a little bit too much on the aw shucks nature of Superman. Like, he quite literally kind of invents his own curse words once in a while to be super family friendly. And it's cute. It got a laugh out of some people. I'm sure kids will enjoy it more than I did. it did a little bit too much for me. Like, you have a Superman who's quite literally acting like this.
Oh, phooey, I burned the darn muffins.
When I kind of want him to act a little bit more like this.
English, motherfucker, do you speak it?
But in all seriousness, like, of course, Superman doesn't need to be swearing and dropping F-bombs, but a little bit too much of the cheese and rice type dialogue from Superman.
And for gosh sake, watch your language.
I thought the action for the most part was really exciting here, but I do think there's a number of spots where James Gunn gets a little bit too close to what is going on, and it causes the camera to have to move around very frantically. You know, it's not obnoxious to the point of like shaky cam where you can't tell what's going on, but I think the best sequences and the most exciting sequences are the one where the camera pulls back, you get this big shot where you can just sit there and see everything that's going on, versus the ones that are a little bit more right in the fight, where you have characters, sometimes multiple characters flying around, and the camera's always trying to keep up with it and swim around them. Even sometimes where he has a little bit of this lens effect that distorts things just slightly. Some people called it out in the trailer whenever you had the flying sequence that was focused on Corn Sweat's face. I think those specific sequences look much better in the film now that it's finished versus they did in the trailer, but you do have a little bit of that effect. It's not quite a fisheye, but something like that happens in some of the fight sequences that it was a stylistic choice that I didn't love. And the last thing that I'll say here, which I won't dwell on long, is that there are moments in the film, and that's quite literally all they are little moments that to me felt like a direct response to and an overcorrection from some of the popular criticisms hailed at Man of Steel. Now, what do I mean by that? An example is that one of the biggest, most prominent criticisms that I still see to this day and still to this day think is ridiculous, that is hailed at Man of Steel, is that the third act, the amount of destruction in Metropolis, makes it a bad movie, makes it a bad take on Superman, because Superman would never allow that to happen. I'm not going to defend the logic there of two gods fighting in a Metropolis, but regardless, there is just as much, if not more, destruction to Metropolis in this film. But they go out of their way to put little moments in there which are operating kind of under the loose comic book logic that we have in this film, admittedly. But, you know, having a news announcement saying, oh, there's a big fight, everybody evacuate the city, as if the entire city can evacuate safely in moments. Or having Superman fly away from a fight to save a squirrel really quickly. Or have him fly away from the fight to catch one building despite 16 other ones falling while he's fighting. I felt like those moments were in there just to kind of circumvent that criticism, when the logic of it really doesn't circumvent it at all for me. So again, not something that really annoyed me. Maybe I shouldn't even put it in the negatives. Maybe it should be in the mixed, but there were moments there that kind of felt like that didn't need to be there for me. And even more so, what I'll say, this is not directed at the film whatsoever, but if you're somebody that hailed those criticisms at Man of Steel, you better hail the same ones at this film where it applies, because Man of Steel is fucking awesome. This film's awesome too, but be consistent, damn it. All in all, guys, I really enjoyed this movie. I think it's a great Superman film. I think for a lot of people, especially younger generations, this is going to be their definitive Superman and their definitive Superman movie. And I think it's a really great kickoff to what hopefully will be a much healthier version of the DC cinematic universe than the one that we got previous. So I'm very happy. I'm very optimistic. I'm very satisfied despite, a few issues here and there. And if you are a Superman fan, I highly encourage you to go check this out, bring out the whole family, and hopefully have a great time with it like I did. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews. For now, I'm going to put my most recent DCEU ranking, but once I actually drop it, this will switch over to my Superman ranking. So check that out in the future. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.